ma'am, will my son be able to do engineering? This is such a mindset that has not changed to this day.
Hello, good day everybody. Greetings from Brindavan. Welcome to Voices of Inclusion, an initiative by Brindavan Education Trust. This is a series of podcasts, and we're going to start our first episode of this podcast named Voices of Inclusion, and it's going to be featured on Dr. Gayathri Krishna, the founder, principal director of Brindavan Education Trust. I am Rajni Padmanabhan. I have been with Brindavan for 23-24 years, and I'm honored to be with you, Gayathri. Welcome.
Thank you, Rajni.
Yeah. So, to give you a brief about Brindavan Education Trust, we are a not-for-profit organization. We've been around since 1993, an age when special education was very much in its infancy, if not in its conception. And we've been, for us in Brindavan, inclusion is a philosophy, it's an approach, and it is something we practice day in and day out. To give a little bit of background of how it was started by these two ladies, Dr. Gayathri Krishna and Mrs. Rupa Shivkumar. Dr. Gayathri Krishna is a PhD from JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. She's a PhD in education and psychology. Yeah. And she was fresh out of her doctoral degree and wanted to work in the space of education. And she met Mrs. Rupa. Mrs. Rupa was in the resource room of Kumaran School. Yes, back then Kumaran Schools was one of the first schools that had a resource room, and rest we'll discover as we talk. So that was how Brindavan started in 1993. Ready, Gayathri, to share your journey with us?
I hope it's interesting, but yes, definitely ready.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
A lot of stories, lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? So to begin with, what drew you towards this field of inclusive education?
Yeah, like Rajani said, it was not exactly called inclusion in those days. Since I came from a background of both psychology and education, I was automatically drawn towards trying to get into that space. But it was not necessarily, my thesis work was on adult education actually. It was nothing to do with children. But then it was a serendipitous meeting with Rupa, who was already working with special needs, and in the course of the discussion, we figured that there was a desperate need, a requirement for some space where people, children especially, who were more than capable of finishing school and who were thrown out, were being unsupported in the mainstream. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thought. So we explored that a bit further at that point.
Okay. Yeah. So it was your background of education, though not necessarily in the field of school education.
Yes.
And Rupa ji's practical experience of being in school in resource room.
Correct.
And finding out that children who ought to be supported were not being supported.
Yeah.
And I think truly that's what Brindavan stands for even now. We are very focused on giving all children opportunities to participate and hence bring out their potential, isn't it, Gayathri?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that sense, Gayathri, I see a commonality even now. The way you described how Brindavan started, that's how we are now also. We see what's happening around us and see what else we need to do.
Yeah.
So,
sorry to interrupt you, but let me just give you a little bit of an anecdote about why or how I started it. Because as I said, I only had a background in working with adults and in education and in the research that I did. And I was having some conversations at the poolside. In those days, in the 90s, it was very popular for parents to sit at the poolside and have lots of gossip sessions. So one of the people I made friends with was also Pushpa, who was principal of Jain Vidyalaya at that point. And then we got to talking, and I realized that what Rupa and I discussed were very similar to what Pushpa and I were discussing. And she was expressing the need for mainstream children to be supported in the mainstream and not be thrown out. So it was from there that I said, okay, let me gain a little bit more information. And I joined the KPMRC course. And I dragged in 3-4 people from the pool to go with me because I didn't want to start studying over again. So that's when, by the time that finished, a year later, Rupa and I consolidated and started the center.
So truly, conversations are beginnings of everything,
Yes,
isn't it?
truly.
Conversations are sometimes not just conversations.
Not at all.
They lead to many meaningful things.
Yeah.
You said KPAMRC.
Right.
Can you tell us what's that, Gayatri? I know what is KPAMRC.
Yeah.
Many of our friends out here may not know.
So this was an initiative by a group of parents, also spearheaded by Mrs. Swami, who is currently director at head of Spastic Society of Karnataka. KPAMRC stands for Karnataka Parents Association for Mentally Retarded Children. But at that time, that was probably the only organization which had a fantastic program for training teachers on specific learning difficulties. They were, I should say, all the teachers in that program were absolutely amazing. And that was the start of how to build a value system, because it was not just what they taught us, but how they express their experiences and their commitment to the field of inclusion at that point. I think that spawned a whole bunch and continues to do so, and also spawned a lot of people like Brindavan, organizations like Brindavan, to start their own training programs as well. True. So that has really been a very motivating factor. All those teachers we are really grateful for.
Thank you. When we talk about education in general, we always say that education has many stakeholders, and that came out clearly in your conversation. You said it was you who had ideas of starting something on these lines. You had a teacher who was Mrs. Rupa, and then you had Pushpa, Mrs. Pushpa, as a mainstream principal. So, so many stakeholders, the special ed people, the principal, and of course the parents and the child. So it took you almost a year to kind of conceptualize the whole thing and get started.
Yeah.
And how did you begin? How big were you when you started?
It was, as I said, it was I think it was a very small beginning, to be very frank with you, because it took me a year to convince myself that it's okay for us to start this initiative. And in the meantime, I was acquiring some level of knowledge about what specific learning difficulties and problems with children could be. And that year was spent in having discussions with various people in the field. And when we started, we also had the space. We were happy to have a little bit of space that was available right in the heart of Jayanagar, which was really very central. And we started with Rupa and I, and no children. So the first month, 2 months, 3 months was spent writing up brochures, visiting schools in the nearby areas, going to different schools and talking to the principals. We already had in our ambit, so to say, Pushpa, who was the very first school to refer children to us from Jain Vidyalaya, that was there. And it so happened that the very first child who was referred was a dropout, a 14-year-old who had been to 1 million schools and was referred to us. And I have to say, it's not just about us being there, it's also about the trust that the parents place in us when they bring their child to something like a special needs center. And though we were just 2 teachers and we were an empty space with a big hall, 4 tables and so many chairs, there is this one parent who placed trust in us. And that's how it began.
So that's how it began.
Yeah.
Because you said the first 2-3 months there was nobody.
Nobody.
And then there was one parent who came along and said, yes, I trust you and you will work with my child.
Yeah. And that child went on to finish his 10th and his 12th with us through the National Open School. And he's in his 40s now. So I'm like great grandparents to so many kids at this point.
That's interesting. So you have named one challenge, which is that parents, you need to find that one parent who needs to place trust in a system like this, right? Because it's not mainstream. Would you call Brindavan mainstream or out of mainstream?
It's very much, I would say, inclusion is not just about being in mainstream school. Inclusion is a place where there is equity, whichever place you go to. There may be instances where children with very severe needs and difficulties will not be able to fit in the mainstream. So I would say definitely Brindavan is also part of the mainstream. There are micro centers and micro issues where, you know, all children cannot be handled in all situations. Equity is something we do look for. Inclusion is something we look for. But inclusion is not just about the school, right? It's also about the parents, it's about your neighbors, it's about other schools, it's about the special needs centers. Everybody together in society will be inclusion. So we have to be careful about how we address awareness is something that is most important. We are born with biases. We don't have anybody who is unbiased about anything. Today, if I have a mobility issue and I go there, the shopkeeper doesn't care that his pavement is broken unless it is pointed out to him. And then the next time I go, if he is an inclusive person, he will make sure there's a railing or a ramp. It's the same with children and with schools.
So when there is acknowledgement that something different is needed, then there is a provision.
So inclusion is also about as much as you can, you do with that awareness that you have. So it's unfair to demand that everybody should be inclusive for about everything everywhere. But as long as its sensitivity is there, as long as people respond to your requirements, as long as there's a need and somebody responds with some positive change, then that is inclusion.
That's why inclusion is a journey, isn't it? It's dynamic, it's relative. We can't have it on an absolute scale. And all of us, like you said, can be more inclusive than what we were 2 years back, depending on who comes in our folds, isn't it? So, besides the factor that you spoke about, which is people coming and you know, giving their children to us and saying, I know you'll take care of them. What were one or two other challenges that you faced?
I think the biggest challenge was about trust. Unfortunately, what happens is that when people do not get what they want from mainstream education, it's very hard for them to say that I'll still take my child out of school even though nothing is happening there. So that was a big challenge. Awareness of what is available outside, whether they can come and see something better happening for their children outside, that is the first point. The other point, of course, is finance, which, all said and done, inclusive education. Funding is something that we always faced a problem with. But we also realize that funding is also a frame of mind, because you can look for just the amount that you need to give support to children, because for us it's all about working with our minds and our hearts and our brains, not so much about making a profit. So when that part comes in, that definitely is a more inclusive thing. So that is a challenge that we did face, but we were able to get through it.
You were able to get past it.
Get past it.
Through and past
Through
it.
it and past it.
Correct. When you spoke about placing trust in us, I was reminded of a parent who's just sent me an email that I saw half an hour back. So we've started a pre-vocational program, right, Gayathri?
Yes.
And that's been there for the last 5 years. We're probably in our 5th year now. And pre-vocational is a very unorganized sector. There is no curriculum laid down for pre-vocational. And so when we have parents asking us, tell me what you'll do with my child, give me quarterly outcomes, or tell me what is the domain training that you'll do and what would be the outcome of it, it is still a hard question to answer. And that is where we go back to saying we are evolving our pre-vocational curriculum. And we've done about 13, 14 children now, and this is what they're doing. We'll share those with you. If you come and ask me what will I specifically do with your child, it's very difficult for me to give a concrete answer.
Yes.
Because it's not an examination that you clear. At the end of the day, we are sure and we will try our best to find what your child needs. But I won't be able to predict that now. Give me 2 years, I will definitely do something with your child. So we're circling back to trust and working together with parents and children.
Let me also give you another incident from what happened in my earliest days. When I first started doing assessments, which was 30 years ago, invariably...
These are, Gayatri, what assessments are these?
Oh, these are what we called educational evaluations, individualized programs where children are not managing in the mainstream, especially academics wise. When I talk about mainstream, they're in a regular school with a regular curriculum and a syllabus. And the children are maybe at first grade level, but are actually in fourth grade. And there's a big gap between what they could do and what they're actually doing. So they come to us for extended educational evaluations, which are mostly skill based. We have to test whether their reading is appropriate for grade level, what are the levels of writing that they have, what is the spelling at, what are the math work like. So they come to us basically for us to give them a document which not only assess them at what their skill levels are, but also gives recommendations on what they need to do about it. So as I said, we had sort of gone around handing out brochures. So at some point, school principals understood that there was this gap and started referring children to us for these educational evaluations. And invariably, we would get 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds who couldn't speak properly. Their speech had not developed fully. Their language skills were really, really low. Their vocabulary, high deficits in vocabulary. And the first questions the parent would ask us as soon as they sat down, 6-year-old, I just started the assessment, and the parent says, "Ma'am, will my son be able to do engineering?" This is such a mindset that has not changed to this day. So when we are talking about sensitizing and awareness, we really do depend heavily on how skillful we can be in getting across to the parents that we have to be patient, just like you said.
Sure.
We can't tell them that a 5-year-old will do engineering 15 years later. Right.
This was when, Gayatri, 30 years ago.
This was 30 years ago.
So 2 days back, you saw this little girl in the office room.
Right.
And we were doing an assessment with her.
Correct.
And her parent came in and said exactly the same thing.
Wow.
She said, "Ma'am, I hope my daughter will be able to lead a productive life. She'll complete her degree and do something." And we said exactly the same. We said, yes, your daughter will be a productive individual in the society, but what we cannot say now, we need to be patient. Yeah. So there are some things that are a constant, though we've been all along sensitizing teachers and parents, which is an integral part of education, isn't it? And I wouldn't say it's part of just special education. It's part of education that you sensitize parents and teachers that you will make children into, or you will train children to be productive and engaged adults. And that's an ongoing journey.
Unfortunately, there's a strong bias
towards
in our culture today towards that piece of paper that says you have achieved something in terms of academic achievement. In my parents' days, in the school level itself, at 9th grade, the children would be told, you have an affinity towards vocation, you have an affinity towards higher education. So they were sent in those directions. And that's how, you could automatically get into a vocation without having to stress out about whether you had that piece of paper. That's not the case even today.
Dignity of labor.
Yeah.
Because you're saying that you're
lost.
good hands-on.
Yes.
So let's do that. You're not saying you're bad at academics, so go to vocation.
Yeah.
You're saying vocation is your strength and hence go there.
Yes.
I hope when the government is working on skilling programs and NSQF is a big thing, I hope we slowly get that in as part of the NEP.
The NEP, the papers, the policy is wonderful. What we see on the ground is what we need to implement. I have to say, we have a long way to go to work for it. And I'm not saying it's because of ignorance now, at least there is more awareness. Again, going back to an anecdote, in my childhood days when I was at school and I had my cousin brother who was living with us, he was the most amazing teenage child who could dismantle a car engine within half an hour and assemble it again all within an hour and a half. He failed 10 times in BSc trying to do math. And that was something that followed him all through his life. He never went into a vocation that would, really enhance his mechanical abilities, his mechanical skills, his ingenuity in those areas. And that was such a sad thing now that I recall. It was not available at those times. Now I hope with NEP and more emphasis on skill and vocation.
It has. Actually, the last 7-8 years, I see that there are more skill-based programs where they have, so to say, dropped the entry level. They aren't saying we need 12th pass. We are saying, okay, 10th pass is fine, we can get into skilling. So I hope that trend continues, and I'm sure it will, with emphasis being on skilling. Back to what we were talking about, Gayathri, share us a little about how you built this wonderful team that that talks inclusion, that practices inclusion. Because we currently have about what?
50
to 60 teachers. And how did this come about? How is it so soaked in inclusion? Well, that's what I see.
Yeah. Okay, Rajani, I love the word you keep using when you say organic. It was, as I said, we started with two teachers and one child. And we gradually, very quickly grew into a group of 6 or 8 teachers within a space of, say, 3-4 years. Mostly because there were many parents who, mothers especially, who were extremely well qualified technically, but not necessarily qualified for special needs education.
Okay.
But highly educated people.
So these were your teachers?
These were my teachers, because they wouldn't have got a job in a school because they did not have an MSc or a B.Ed or qualifications like that.
Formal training.
A common training like that, but who would fit into a special needs center provided they had dedication and passion. And they were looking for alternate services to enter, and this was one place where they also had the flexibility. They could come in for 2 hours, they could come in for 4 hours, and then that culture of having, again, as we say, it was never at any point a social service. We made that very clear right from the beginning. This has to be a profession. You can work for 2 hours, you can work for 3 hours, but your commitment has to be for 1 year, not for 3 months, not once a week.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's professional in that sense.
It's a professional in that sense. It's a commitment in that sense. And very quickly, how it is when you're building a culture like that, word does spread. So it's never really been needed that we have to advertise for people to come and join our team. And once they come in, that culture sort of enters their genes, I would say, or their way of working. And then they become committed and they become dedicated, they become passionate. So even today, we have a whole group of people who are working here not even for the money, mind you, because we don't really pay great money, but that's not the point. The point is that passion is there, that commitment is there, and the sincerity is there.
True, and it's a very open space where we are forever exchanging ideas, right? Growth, and it's a very growth-focused approach.
Yeah.
Like I said in the beginning, when we talk about inclusion here, it's a philosophy, it's a approach, and it is in practice. And this continues till date. Every year, the last 7-8 years that I've actually actively been at the leadership level, I've had at least 1 or 2 teachers come and tell me that when I started working in Brindavan, 2-3 months down the line, I feel very empowered. I can now effortlessly tell my family that just like you have a workspace to go to and you will not make excuses, it's the same for me. I am going there because it's a commitment.
Correct.
I have a class waiting for me. I have activities that only I can do, and hence I need to do. It's not optional. I am making the choice of going there because I want to go there. And when the first time I heard it, I was like, wow. Without knowing it, we're actually doing a lot of empowerment of everybody who works with us, including our support staff.
Yeah.
I don't catch our support staff saying, are you papa or no? Because that's one thing we keep saying, isn't it? Don't use the word papa. Don't use the word pavam. Because we're not sympathizing with them. We are there to understand what they can do and what they cannot do, and teach them what they cannot do.
Yes.
So I think that's a lot of culture, both from top down and bottom up, which is seeping in.
Yeah.
Because I see our old support staff training the new support staff, you know.
That's the best part. Hand-holding always
I
works.
hear them saying, Kai hidi beda, pakkak hogu sako. Means don't hold his hand, just walk along with him,
Yeah,
so that you are
absolutely.
there to support if he trips or falls down, if
Absolutely.
he were to. So
Absolutely.
I think that's very important. I have written down some pointers so that I don't go all over the place. So part of Brindavan's work is also, it has come out in your conversation, but maybe you can give us a little capsule, is working with mainstream schools and seeing how we can empower students and teachers there. Can you share a couple of things that come to your mind about that?
Basically, working with mainstream school is a very important aspect of it. I will say that we have both been extremely successful and extremely unsuccessful in that area. Extremely successful in that in those days, today we are talking inclusion, we don't talk about resource rooms. But in those days when there was nothing available, resource rooms were an option. And we started our very first resource room in Jain School in 1994. And we had to go and train teachers there. And we had a lot of convincing to do. I'll go back to my swimming pool incident and say that's where I met the principal of the school and we had all these conversations. And when she said, why don't you start a resource room in our school? I very gladly took her up on the offer, and we had to get, I said, can you hire 2 teachers? She said, I can't hire 2 teachers, but I can get somebody who's already in the school to work in the resource room. I said, tell me who your best teacher can be. She said, this is actually about how we had to convince people. So we got the teacher who's an excellent English teacher. It took us at least 10 sessions in the swimming pool to convince her that she can work in the resource room. She did not want to leave her mainstream classroom. So then, when you're talking about how important it is, it took that level of convincing, but it was so important for us because that school had 2,000 children. And in Brindavan, we were working with 20 or 30 children at that point. Imagine going to a center, going to a school where there are 2,000 children, and those 2,000 children in some way or the other will be supported by the resource room because of a spillover effect. Not every child will come to the resource room, but the person in the resource room will go to the teachers and explain to them what she is doing, talk to them about it. So the impact is multiplied. So inclusion can only happen if you go into the mainstream. I am contradicting what I said earlier, that inclusion will happen in every micro level. But then on the other hand, when it's the children, the mainstream is referring them to us, then that is inclusion. Because they cannot handle the child, they feel the child will get a better deal with us, that is inclusion, because we are going to support the child 100%.
True.
But what about the other 3,000 children in the mainstream?
True.
They should become empathetic, they should be taught some level of empathy. Otherwise, when they go out into the real world, inclusion cannot happen. So mainstream is a step where we have to enter, and that will impact what happens in society later on.
Got it. So, and it's also the snowballing effect.
It's a snowballing effect.
You work with one teacher, ripple effect, snowballing and ripple both.
Correct.
So you work with one teacher, that teacher reaches out to that many children or that many colleagues, and then there's somebody else who sees, oh yeah, that's something nice that's happening. That's when the ripple effect, where you say, let me also see how it happens, isn't it? So in a way, you indirectly answered one of the questions I had, which is how do you measure the impact of what we're doing? And one of the ways is this, isn't it? How many teachers are you impacting, and in turn, how many are they able to impact? So you also spoke about different kinds of inclusion, isn't it? And you also spoke about how earlier in your days, when by say that, what I'm meaning is 20 years ago, resource room was the way, right? Now we're talking about more inclusion in classrooms.
Yes.
What are your thoughts around this? And this will lead us towards the end of our conversation. Do you think there's only one way we can do it, or all these subsystems can coexist, where we have teachers going into classrooms, we have children being pulled out to resource rooms, and we have children being pulled out from schools into schools like ours? Like, how do you see the whole thing as one?
Yes, all of it is needed, because as I said, if you look at a mainstream school, you have one class with 40 children in a classroom on an average, and it's practically next to impossible for the teacher to manage all the 40 children with all the diversity unless a lot of support is given. And that support basically comes from training the teachers. And training teachers is one very aspect that is really not being very well implemented at this point. So it is important for individual schools to decide, individual managements to decide how much of training will happen there, and then inclusion can happen. So that is a very important part of inclusion, as you said. What happens next for the children who still cannot be managed once that is, and it's not just the training, it's also the resources that are made available. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have materials to support it, then you still won't be able to implement it. Okay, then the next stage is when they find that they cannot manage those children in the mainstream school. It's okay for them to send the child out to individual centers like, say, for Brindavan or many others that have come up now, and that is also inclusion.
Correct. So we're talking about multiple layers.
Multiple layers.
And multiple layers of both exit and entry.
Yes.
Where you're saying, I tried, but let me try this also. Isn't it? So when you look at it that way, there's no one way of inclusion, isn't it?
There's no
as
one
long
way.
as we're giving a child opportunities to learn, to participate,
Yes.
to do something.
Yes, and one, like you said, we can't leave out parents, because they are the most important part of the inclusive journey. Parents have lots of expectations. It's not possible for us to meet all their expectations, and the expectations keep changing. And for a child with special needs, I think one of the current phrases is, lived experiences.
True.
There's so many lived experiences that it's impossible for us to translate, because you can never walk in their shoes. Like you said, you can walk next to them, right? And those lived experiences have many demands also in addition. So what they expect from the mainstream is sometimes it's very high, sometimes it's difficult for us to, execute. But yes, that inclusion, when it happens, and we look at the parental expectations also, then combining all of it together is not just a part of the mainstream ethos. It also spills over into society.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
Because oftentimes we have the children going to the best school and having the best education, having the best experiences in school. But when they come home, their children are not allowed to play with other children in the same apartment complex.
True. Very
so
true.
That is not inclusion.
Very true.
So we can't say inclusion is only about the education system. But again, as we said, there is a ripple effect, there is a spillover effect, what we call a sphere of influence. If 3 people are convinced, they'll tell 3 other people who will tell, 6 into 6, so it multiplier effect is there.
True.
So that's how we should look at inclusion.
And I hear you talking about inclusion in society very often now, Gayathri.
Yes.
And we should take up your idea of talking about inclusion in huge apartment complexes.
Yes.
Even if I'm being very optimistic, even if 100 people come, and if 10 people go back saying, I will look at that boy who's generally not part of the group,
Yes.
or I look at that mother who's very apologetic about her child, I think we've reached one person in that apartment complex, right?
Yes, we should.
So we've spoken about a host of things in this last 35 minutes.
Wow.
We've spoken about how we started. We spoke about how conversations can lead to organizations like Brindavan. We've spoken about trust. We've spoken about collaboration. We've spoken about how mainstream schools and schools like ours and societies together contribute to inclusion.
Yes.
We've spoken about training of teachers, etc., etc., etc. I would like you to share with us and to everybody who will listen to this podcast one thing that you really want all of us to take away from your experiences. You spoke about lived-in experiences. So give us one takeaway from your lived-in experience in this journey of education.
I would say introspection. I think it's very important for any one of us who's listening to any conversation like this to sort of sit and think to themselves, to be mindful, to introspect a bit on what is that one little thing that I can do. Empathy is good. Empathy, they say, is very innate. It's not something that everybody will have, but it's something that many people can be exposed to. Trained or exposed to, but still, even with that training, it's very difficult for us to do that one little thing that we need to do. So I think more than anything else, we need to, and the other thing is, I won't say humility in that sense, not to be self-deprecatory or anything like that, but to understand that we don't know many things, and to be able to say that we don't know this, but we are willing to learn about this, we have the curiosity, and that we'll try to do some little thing about it. I think being humble is a good, whatever it may be, the current trend, I think humility is a trait that one of us can look for.
Just combining what you said, Gayathri, when I'm aware or when I tell myself that there are many things that I don't know, that is when I will also look into what is that one thing I can do, right? Let me be very pompous and say, to make the world a better place to live in.
Yes.
Thank you, Gayathri. It was beautiful conversing with you.
Thank you.
And I learned many more things about you today than I did in the last 30 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being part of this journey with us. If you have any thoughts or questions about what we discussed, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and see you soon with a new episode of Voices of Inclusion.